her, but she is our resident Islamic scholar in Toledo. She accomplished many things, but her PhD in Islamic Studies is from University of Michigan. She has been a member of the Islamic Center from the early 70s and before, perhaps. She was one of the first teachers to actually write uh, books for the Islamic school, and they were practiced. I have one copy of that from before. And today's lecture is very relevant, actually, the effect of war on women, which I think if you've watched the news these days, you will see absolutely the relevance of that subject. So, Dr. Fatma Hayya.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Although this is about Iraqi women, and the reason for that is because there has been research done and done by competent people about the result of war on women in Iraq, how Iraqi women were before, and what happened during, and then what happened afterwards. A lot of people don't realize that war affects everybody, but in one sense, it affects women and children more than anybody else.
Just stand over there where the light is.
Oh,
Those lights
okay. If you want me to, that's fine.
That would be-
Oh, I can go back and forth. I think
No, you
they
can't
can.
appear in the video.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
Otherwise you-
All right. Let me just start by talking about this press release. New UN policy paper shows the devastating impacts of the Ukraine war on women and girls. I'm not going to go into details because the details are very gruesome. The idea is the same, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Lebanon, wherever it's in the United States as well. It says the war has widened gender gaps in food insecurity, malnutrition, energy poverty, and increased gender-based violence inside Ukraine and around the world. The same thing is happening right now in Gaza. As you well know, it's over 30,000 dead. They say, we don't know really. We don't know how many are under the rubble. We don't know how many are not counted. And if you look at the women, you see them carrying their babies, nursing their babies, caring for their babies, trying to wash the clothes, trying to cook. Yes, the men are working, they're picking, they're doing, but it seems to be the crux of the burden has been placed on women. And if you look at the children in Gaza on the Rafah border, they're little kids holding these little pots so they can get a little bit of soup or with something. So really the children and the women suffer the most. Moreover, the women who are expecting children are having children with no anesthetics, no antibiotics, no health help at all. And many of them are losing their children. Many of the children are dying because they need maybe some medical attention or because of nutrition. And when the woman is trying to nurse her babies, she does not have the nutrition in her body to create milk to help those babies. So you can see the impact just on that part alone. The new UN policy paper published as the UN Security Council meets on Ukraine reveals how the war and its global impacts on food, energy, and finance are affecting women and children and girls disproportionately, both inside Ukraine and globally. Additionally, the report shows that there are alarming increases in gender-based violence, transactional sex for food and survival, sexual exploitation, and trafficking, and early child and forced marriage as a result of these worsened living conditions in conflict, crisis, and humanitarian context worldwide. The same problem is going to appear in every war. Forced child marriages, use of women use their bodies to feed themselves. It's happening in everywhere, actually. In fact, I read a big research, which I will be working on the impact of war or the effect of the regime in Iran on women and girls in Iran. And that will be coming soon, I hope. The problem with that is the information is very limited. So I need to really dig in very, very hard. But it is happening, let's face it. Iraq has seen decades of conflict, just as most of the Arab world, actually. From war with Iran in the 80s to the 1991 Gulf War and embargo and the US invasion in 2003. By the way, when you talk about war, I don't want to concentrate only on arms and bombs and airplanes. War happens in many different ways. The embargo on Iraq was not a military war later. It was in the 1991, yes, but it did not hit the rest of Iraq, only the southern part of Iraq. The embargo was a worse war because, first of all, it did not allow Iraq to sell its oil. They did not have money to feed their people. So it was a worse war than the military war with bombs and all of that. The years of turmoil have widowed women and orphaned children, further worsening the conditions in which they live. Historically, Iraqi women and girls have enjoyed relatively more rights than many of their counterparts in the Middle East. And the reason I'm talking about that, because I did my dissertation research in Iraq. So I know firsthand what's going on. I met with all the officials, including the Supreme Court judges, the regular judges, the minister of, the Attorney General of Iraq. I met with all of them. So I knew personally what was going on as well. The Iraqi Provisional Constitution, drafted in 1970, formally guaranteed equal rights to women, and other laws specifically ensured their right to vote, attend school, run for political office, and own property. One thing that's really very interesting, there was a law, maybe it'll be coming, I'll talk about it later maybe. Since the 1991 Gulf War, the position of women within Iraqi society has deteriorated rapidly. Women and girls were disproportionately affected by the economic consequences of the UN sanctions and lacked access to food, healthcare, and education. These effects were compounded by changes in the law that restricted women's mobility and access to the formal sector in an effort to ensure jobs to men and appease conservative, religious, and tribal groups. Let me give you an example of what happened in the United States in the Second World War. During the war, women were engaged in factory work. They all had jobs, all of them. Once the war was over, the women were put aside and the jobs were given to the men. Same thing happened here. So it's not only pervasive in Arab countries. In fact, the same situation is in the US after World War II, when women worked and then lost their jobs to men when the war ended. Another thing I want to talk about education. When I was there was a law instituting literacy for everybody. It was forced on everybody. If you don't go and learn how to read and write, they will take away some of your privileges. So I saw this old man, he had no teeth, he's so old. And I said, why are you going to the school? He said, Ya ukhti, my sister, I want to know if there's a sign telling me there's a hole in the road so I can avoid it so I don't fall in it. I want to read, I want to find out what's going on. And so every person in Iraq was given 10 dinars. At that time, remember, the dinar was $3. So if I had 100 dinars, I had $300. So they were giving him 10 dinars for every session they attend in order to eliminate illiteracy. Prominent feminist groups such as the Iraqi Women's League, as well as the anti-imperialist secular left, had championed the 1959 Personal Status Code to protect women's rights. It established a minimum marriage age of 18 and guaranteed the right to divorce and inheritance. Not that Islam does not allow women to inherit. We are allowed to inherit. The problem is the males of the family. I'll give you an example and that will explain everything. I had a student at the university who asked me a question. She inherited land in Palestine, in the West Bank. Her father died and she inherited the land, but her brothers won't give it to her. And I said, why? He said, well, if I give it to you and you're married to somebody who's not in the family, then your kids from a different family are going to take part of our land. I told her, why don't you go to the court, the Muslim court? She said, they won't let me because they said you're going to dishonor the name of the family. And that is totally anti-Islamic. And this is the problem. The problem is we are having traditions and cultural behavior affect Islamic law. Yeah, we follow Islamic law, pray 5 times a day, do the wudu, do this, do that. But when it comes to crucial issues, then we decide not to follow them. The law was a product of the Iraqi women's movement, and the first woman minister in Iraq and the Arab world, Naziha al-Dulaimi, helped write it. It united the rights of Iraqi Sunnis and Shias under one law and openly challenged the conservative political elite installed during the former British Band-Aid. Women's status in Iraq prior to the 1991 Gulf War, by the United States, by the way. After seizing power in 1968, the secular Ba'ath Party embarked on a program to consolidate its authority and to achieve rapid economic growth despite labor shortages. Women's participation was integral to the attainment of both of these goals, and the government promulgated laws specifically aimed at improving the status of women in the public, and to a more limited extent, the private spheres. What do I mean by the private spheres? I'm talking about family. It used to be that in the family, the boy, especially if the oldest boy, controls everything in the family. So if his sister wants to go and work, he can say to her, no, you're not allowed to work. Now, they took care of that. That's very important. Or the husband says, I don't want you to work. When the woman has a degree, let's say, and she can work. And that was a problem. The status of Iraqi women has thus been directly linked to the government's overreaching political and economic policies. In 1968, the secular Ba'ath Party embarked on a program to consolidate its authority and to achieve rapid economic growth despite labor shortages. I remember in one year when we were coming from Baghdad, going back to Beirut, the airport was full of Egyptian men. They all worked there. Thousands of them worked in Iraq. And by the way, another thing that I found very interesting, the Iraqi government disallowed anybody having a maid in the house. You need somebody to help you with the cleaning, they can come in the daytime, but they cannot stay there. You cannot enslave them, which I thought was very interesting because in Beirut we had one living there in the house. Women's participation was integral to the attainment of both of these goals, and the government promulgated laws specifically aimed at improving the status of women in the public and to a more limited extent, the private sphere. I repeat that because it's really very crucial. Unless the government really forces these laws, nobody's going to follow them. Until the 1990s, Iraqi women played an active role in the political and economic development of Iraq. A robust civil society had existed prior to the coup d'etat in 1968, including a number of women's organizations. The Ba'ath Party dismantled most of these civil society groups after its seizure of power, And shortly after, it established the General Federation of Iraqi Women. I met the president of the Iraqi Women Federation, and she is related to Shakir's family. Very, very well educated woman. And what they do was totally amazing to me. The reason for that is because in the United States, I'm involved in custody laws in the court system in the United States, custody and maintenance and divorce and marriage. What I saw, and I know that when I was chairman of the Human Relations Committee with the city of Toledo, the prosecutor who was in my committee told me that in many cases, it is very hard to enforce maintenance law on the husband. Why? She said they come to this judge and then they have appeal. They appeal it. And the woman, she has children, she has no way to feed them. Nothing happens. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, then they appeal again, and they move the case again, and they move the case again. The Organization of Women and the government in Iraq at that time, in the 70s and the 80s, when a man does not support his family, or they are divorcing, or they have divorced, they make sure they garnish his salary on the first day, immediately, and give it to the woman and her children. Okay. So if the man doesn't have any jobs, doesn't have money, what do? The government takes that woman, puts her with this agency. She's given home, food, shelter, education, and children. Her children are taken care of, and they teach her a trade at the same time. And I met many of these women who couldn't even read and write. They taught them how to read and write. They found a trade, either sewing or whatever it is. And they were able to support themselves and their families later. Actually, the Code of Personal Status was first promulgated in 1959 under the regime of Abdul Karim Qasim, which took part after the overthrow of the Hashemite monarchy in July 1958. Until that time, family laws were based on tradition or customary law and had never been codified. Qasim was executed in 1963, and many of the family law reforms he had implemented were reversed by the successive rulers under religious pressure. I want you to pay attention to the religious pressure part. It is working today in every Muslim country. They use that, but they only use their own interpretation of that law to affect the rights of women. And that is a very serious problem that we face today. Article 2F and G requires states parties to modify or abolish existing laws, regulations, customs, and practices, including penal provisions which constitute discrimination against women. Now, most of this is under the Ba'ath regime, which everybody demonized. Yes, they had their issues, dictatorship, sure. But they've done a lot of good things that we need to address. I wish our government here could do the same today. Article 9 guarantees women's individual nationality rights as well as their right to confer nationality upon their children, whereas Iraqi National Law 4361 allows only the father to confer nationality upon his children. Today, even in Lebanon, my kids cannot be Lebanese, even though I'm Lebanese. I have a Lebanese citizenship because it's only the father who can initiate that. Article 16 pertains to the elimination of discrimination in all matters relating to marriage and family relations. And discrimination could be physical, could be material. You can't have this, I'm not going to give you money, you cannot go work, you cannot go get education, You cannot visit your mother. In fact, in one of the programs I watched one day, a woman asked this big imam, I'm not going to name him, he's dead now, God take care of him. She told him, my husband is, my neighbor has nobody in this area, in this city. And she's very sick. Her husband is traveling because he's working. And my husband forbids me to go visit her. I feel bad because she needs somebody. She has nobody and she's sick. This is what he told her. Obey your husband. Is this God? Is this the merciful God that we pray to every day? No. In order to further its program of economic development, the government passed a compulsory education law mandating that both sexes attend school through the primary level. Although middle and upper class Iraqi women had been attending university since 1920, listen to this. Rural women and girls were largely uneducated until this time. So this is really very, very important. In December 1979, the government passed further legislation requiring the eradication of illiteracy. I talked about that. An illiterate person all illiterate person between ages 15 and 45. The man I saw must have been 65, but he's still going. Were required to attend classes at local literacy centers, many of which were run by the women's organization. Although many conservative sectors of Iraqi society refused to allow women in their communities to go to such centers, despite potential prosecution, the literacy gap between males and females narrowed. The women's organization grew to play a significant role in implementing state policy, primarily through its role in running more than 250 rural and urban community centers, offering job training, educational, and other social programs for women, and acting as a channel for communication of state propaganda. Female officers within the organization also played a role in the implementation of legal reforms advancing women's status under the law and in lobbying for changes to the personal status code. The importance of this is the fact that if you have private schools and you have a boy and a girl, chances are you're going to send your boy, not the girl. And this kind of stuff eliminated all of that because education in Iraq is all free, was all free, from preschool all the way to PhDs in any country in the world. And by the way, in many cases, it still is. The primary legal underpinning of women's equality is contained in the Iraqi Provisional Constitution, which was drafted by the Ba'ath Party in 1970. Article 19 declares all citizens equal before the law, regardless of sex, lineage, language, social origin, or religion. Now, this is really very important. Sometimes if you're from a big family, you get a special treatment. From a poor family, you get a different treatment. Women get different treatment. Men get different treatment. Covenants on civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights, which provide equal protection under international law. This is really very, very important. Unless we can do that in the United States, women really have no chance. The Iraqi government also passed labor and employment laws to ensure that women were granted equal opportunities in the civil service sector, maternity benefits, and freedom from harassment in the workplace. Such laws had a direct impact on the number of women in the workforce. This is very important. What I saw over there, if a woman is expecting, by 6 months of her pregnancy, she is given 6 months to go home, take care of her family, take care of her health, with her money going through. I mean, she's got a salary. It's not cut. After she delivers, she has 6 months to stay with the child, take care of him at the same time. After that, if she chooses to go to work, then what they do have, which I visited, they have nurseries near where the workplaces are. And they allow her time to go nurse her child. They allow her time to have breakfast with her child. I'll give her time to go and have lunch with her child and allow her to go a little early, pick up her child, go home, take care of the cooking or whatever she wants to do. I mean, this is unbelievable. The fact that the government has opposed, as opposed to the private sector, was hiring women. And by the way, they are paid the same wages as men, no matter what the position is. You cannot give a man with the same position 100 and the women 50 or 60 or 70. Same thing. The fact that the government has, as opposed to the private sector, was hiring women contributed to the breakdown of the traditional reluctance to allow women to work outside the home. The Iraqi Bureau of Statistics reported that in '76, women constituted approximately 38.5% of those in the education profession, 31% of the medical profession, 25% of lab technicians, 15% of accountants, and 15% of civil servants. During the Iran-Iraq War, 1980-1988, women assumed greater roles in the workforce in general and in the civil service in particular, reflecting the shortage of working-age men. Until the 1990s, the number of women working outside the home continued to grow. While most advances in women's status occurred in the political and economic spheres, the government also made modest changes to the personal status law in 1978. And this is what my dissertation was all about, that area right there, the amendments to family law in Iraq. As a matter of fact, I found out that indirectly that the United Nations is using my dissertation as a base when they want to address Islamic law vis-a-vis women and their rights. And I was really amazed. For example, divorced mothers were granted custody of their children until the age of 10, previously 7 for boys and 9 for girls, at which time, at the discretion of a state-employed judge, custody could be extended to the child's 15th birthday. We do have, as you well know, we do have madahib, we have schools of law. And every scholar in the school of law has his own interpretation of custody. For example, some of them say at age 7, the boy is taken by the father during a divorce. By the age of 10 or 9, the girl should be taken to her father's. And whether he allows her to see them or not is another issue. Others say no, they can keep the child later than that. Another said, no, let's wait till the child is 12 years old and then let that child choose whether to stay with the mother or the father. And they extended to the 15th birthday. Even then, the child could choose which parent to live. I tell you what, I was in Damascus one year, and we were visiting members of a distant family of ours in Damascus. The children were the result of a divorce, and they're living with their father, who got remarried. And what I saw, how the stepmother was affecting the treatment of the children, made me sick. It was like they were her maids or servants. And so when you keep the children with their own mother, no matter how, maybe not that fit of a mother, she will still have more emotion, maybe. I don't know. I mean, Cinderella didn't come out of the blue. Her stepmother was a witch. I mean, she was bad. So that is pervasive. This is nothing new. And I've seen that with my own eyes in many cases. So that law that they've changed is really very good. And the Quran does not state any age, by the way. Has nothing to do with the age. The Quran said you have to be good to kids. You have to be good to orphans. You have to be good to the poor, especially children. Changes were also made to the conditions under which a woman could seek divorce and regulations concerning polygamous marriages and inheritance. Let's talk about the divorce section. Under Hanafi law, who is a scholar, Abu Hanifa, the man only has the right to initiate divorce, no matter what, even if he has been absent for years. And I can give you a case that really pushed me into this area. There was a lady here in Toledo. I always brought Sharia books with me, Islamic law books, to read, all of them, from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt. And I was always interested by the inadequacy of performing justice concerning women under Islam. How could that be? I'm told Islam is a religion who liberated women, gave them their rights. So what happened? So I kept bringing those books. This lady heard about me reading those. At that time, I was teaching French, and I had my master's in French, and I was going to go into languages. This is her story. A man married her in Damascus. He's from the United States, and she's living in Damascus. She's living with her mother and father, who are really poor. They're destitute. So he marries her, and he comes to the States. And he lives there for 5 years. No compensation and money or anything. And here she was struggling with her family to feed herself, and then she had a baby. 5 years later, he goes back. Okay? He wants to go back to her. She told him, no way. 5 years you've been gone, you haven't supported me or the kids, or they went to the judge. And since Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and Turkey and parts of Palestine follow the Hanafi law, he told her, you have no recourse. He has the right to divorce, you cannot. You have to take him back. So she took him back. That's another point that should be really stressed, and that is we don't know our laws. We don't study, we don't read. And she accepted it. The same thing happened. He was gone. She had another baby. She had a sister in Toledo. She made papers for her. She brought her here. Okay. Now she said she wants a divorce. She came to Imam we had at the time. He told her, you can't. He has to initiate the divorce. So she came to me. I said, no, that's not true. You don't have to follow the Hanafi law. There's the Maliki, there's the Shafi'i, and there are conditions. If he leaves you without compensation, whether it's physical or material, after 4 months, 6 months, you can divorce him. You can initiate the divorce. So I told her, go ahead. So the woman got remarried, had her children, she's living good. Abuse or interpretation of the law, one-sidedness, has created a lot of problems for women. In Iraq, a woman, if she has grounds, she can go to any court and show all the evidence, and she can get her divorce. In fact, if the man is incapable or physically doing something with his woman for months, she has a right to divorce. Because the Quran said, أَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ وَهُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ. You are their garment and they are your garment, and therefore you need to give affection to each other. So that's another problem. I'm very interested to see what goes on in Gaza after the war. I'm very interested to see how curtailed the women will be after the war, how shortchanged they're going to be. How is it going to affect the young girls when going to school is going to be a hardship? Whether they keep her home to clean the house and cook and take care of the family, or go to school. It would be really very interesting to see what comes out of this. The other thing they did with the divorce, once she divorced, they kick her out of the house. The Iraqi commission said, no, if she has children, she stays in the house until her kids are grown and gone, which is a blessing. These reforms reflected the Ba'ath Party's attempt to modernize Iraqi society and to supplement loyalty to extended families and tribal society with loyalty to the government and ruling party. You know, we all hate non-democratic governments. However, sometimes people, you know, we always use the carrot and the stick. Sometimes you need to use the stick once in a while. Women attained the right to vote and run for office in 1980. In 86, Iraq became one of the first countries to ratify the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. Can you believe that? And we call them the third world countries. While this represented a positive step for Iraqi women, the reservations entered in regard to Articles 2F, 2G, and 16 undermined the guarantees of equality at the heart of the Convention. Namely, these reservations sought to justify continued application of national laws that discriminate on the basis of sex, especially those in relation to women's and girls' rights within the familial structure, on the grounds that they are largely dictated by Islamic law. What they mean by familial structure is, like I mentioned before, the oldest son or the father, or even the cousin, if he's male, can control what the female does in the family. After the embargo, the gender gap in school enrollment and subsequently female literacy increased dramatically due to families' financial inability to send their children to school. When faced with limited resources, many families chose to keep their girl children at home. According to the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, as a result of the National Literacy Campaign as of 1987, approximately 75% of Iraqi women were literate. However, by year 2000, Iraq had the lowest regional adult literacy levels, with the percentage of literate women at less than 25%. Women and girls have also suffered from increasing restrictions on their freedom of mobility and protection under the law. In collusion with conservative religious groups and tribal leaders, the government issued numerous decrees and introduced legislation negatively impacting women's legal status in the law, in the code, criminal justice system, and personal status laws. During the embargo, there was a lot of uproar in Iraq, and there were a lot of upheavals against the government in order to please tribes, demand, Muslim societies. They acquiesced to them. They had no choice. In 2001, the UN Special Rapporteur for Violence Against Women reported that since the passage of the reform in 1991, an estimated 4,000 women and girls had been victims of honor killings. Honor killings exist today in every Muslim country. Whether we want to admit it or not, it does exist. And what does it mean? It means that somebody saw, there was a case in Jordan, for example. A girl was waiting at the bus station, young woman, and a young man came and asked her directions or something. So somebody saw her talking to him, went to her brother and said, I saw your sister was so-and-so. And then she was killed. In recent years, both the Kurdistan Democratic Party and the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan administrations in northern Iraq issued decrees suspending laws allowing for mitigation of sentences in honor crimes. But the degree to which the suspension has been implemented is unknown. So if you do that as an honor killing, you're exempt. Well, you can do 30 days or 15 days or a month or 2 months. And it's very sad. Furthermore, as the economy constricted in an effort to ensure employment for men, the government pushed women out of the labor force and into more traditional roles in the home. In 1998, the government reportedly dismissed all females working as secretaries in governmental agencies. In June 30, 2000, restrictions on women working outside the home were instituted. Women's freedom to travel abroad was also confronted the possibility of being overthrown. It used to be that a woman could not leave the country without her husband's permission, without her father's permission, without her brother's permission, even if her brother is 5 years old. I remember when I took Nada and Muna to Iraq, and on the way coming out, they wouldn't let me take them out because they thought I was kidnapping them or something. So I had to prove to them that they are my children and they are American citizens and they have American passports. And it took me a long time to get out. In March 90, a presidential decree was issued exempting men who kill or assault their female relatives in defense of their family's honor from prosecution and punishment, resulting in a resurgence of a practice that had markedly decreased. I mean, I lived in Lebanon until I was 17. I never saw anything like that, but it has come back. UN Commission on Human Rights report to the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women said that under the decree, a male defendant accused of murder or assault of a female relative may plead as a defense that he was motivated by a real or perceived breach of family honor. In murder cases, this defense can result in the reduction of the minimum prison term from 8 years to 6 months, and now it's a few weeks maybe. As a matter of fact, this stuff is happening in the West Bank today also. It's happening in Gaza also. And as the war proceeds, it's going to happen even more. Also, this law legally restricted and formally co-educational high schools were required by law. They used to be together, and now they are separate. To provide single-sex education only, further reflecting the reversion to religious and tribal traditions. The problem is in these countries, not necessarily in the Middle East, in any country, whenever things become very difficult, they go back to the strict interpretation of certain scriptures in order to justify what they do. As a result of these combined forces, by the last years of Saddam Hussein's government, the majority of women and girls had been relegated to traditional roles within the home. The economic impact of 1991 Gulf War further fueled social discontent, and the Ba'ath Party reversed many of its earlier social policies in an attempt to foster loyalty among tribal and religious groups. Saddam Hussein began incorporating religious rhetoric into the party's platform and also reinstated tribal sheikhs as leaders, arming them and giving them land. The tribal sheikhs play a big role in Iraq. There are many tribes. They're very strong. They're very powerful. They're rich. And they control their own tribe. So if one person from one tribe attacked a person from another tribe, they have the right to avenge themselves outside the government. It happened in Shakar's family as well. So these things have came back. The US-led invasion and occupation administration put political groups in power that attempted to undo one of the most important legacies for Iraqi women, the personal status code. In 2003, however, political groups linked to Shia Islamist political parties, largely in exile, by the way, proposed to completely abolish Iraq's personal status code. When this attempt failed, thanks in part to protests by women's groups, Shia parties proposed an alternative to establish a sectarian-based personal status code. Their proposal marked a significant break with the code's political legacy, reflecting instead the nature of the system put in place by the US administration in 2003. It defined political representation based on communal belonging through ethnic, such as Arab or Kurd, sectarian, Sunni Shia, and religious, Muslim, Christian, and other affiliation. By the way, that's the same thing in Lebanon today. We haven't had a government in years. The president has to be a Catholic, Maronite, The prime minister has to be a Muslim Sunni. The parliament head has to be a Shia. And the parliament members can be from all kinds of groups. So they have never been able to get together to even open the parliament. We haven't had a president for years. We haven't had an issue discussed in the parliament for years. And who instituted that? The French, when they colonized Lebanon. Along these lines, some Shia political forces have been pushing for the Iraqi parliament to adopt a code based on Shia jurisprudence, commonly referred to as Jafari law. That's another lecture. The Jafari law is one of the Islamic schools, but it is basically a Shia scholar. This law, which would apply to Iraqi Shias, could permit marriage for girls as young as 9 and allow unions with no legal protection for women. It would also weaken the power of the previously state-appointed judges in determining whether cross-sectarian marriages are possible, instead granting this power to sectarian religious authorities. I will tell you a story that my husband and I witnessed in Baghdad when I was doing my research. We met with the judge of Baghdad, very learned man, beautiful man. And I'm talking to him about the laws, how it was implemented, etc. He gave me a story. He said Thursday, he had a man bringing birth certificate of his daughter and a man with him who was supposed to marry her. And he said, I looked at this man who's going to marry this little girl, and he looked, my God, among us. So he had his doubts. He told them, you know what? It's Thursday and Friday is our holiday. Why don't you wait a couple of days and come back? So, okay. In the meantime, what did he do? Now, this is what can government do. Even though it's religious, they cannot apply religious law, but they can adhere to it. They can force it. He took the girl to the women's organization. They have doctors, women doctors. They examined the girl. And they told him, if she marries that guy, she'll probably bleed to death, she'll die. So when he came back, he told them no license. And you cannot marry in Iraq without a license. I mean, they're going back to that right now. Now, this law was initiated this year. And the other thing is, another issue that is pervasive in Iraq and in Iran is the temporary marriages, the mut'a marriages, which is another story as well. But I'm not going to go into that now. I don't have time. It would also weaken the power of the previously state-appointed judges in determining whether cross-sectarian marriages can be possible. What do they mean by sectarian? If I'm Sunni and my husband is Shia, can I marry him? That's the issue, even though we're both Muslims. The Shia say no. I have a niece with 2 daughters married to Shia in Lebanon. So, in the past decade, women's rights groups have also fought to adopt a law that would criminalize domestic violence and provide shelters for women victims of abuse and trafficking. We don't even have that today here. We don't even have immediate resolution in the court system to at least supply the woman with support to feed her kids during a divorce. Instead of supporting these campaigns, however, Iraqi authorities have repressed some of the groups. The Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq, for example, the only organization that runs shelters in the country outside of Iraqi Kurdistan, has been criminalized for its advocacy. And in 2020, the Iraqi government filed a lawsuit to strip the organization of its legal right to operate. Meanwhile, its leader, Yanar Mohammed, has faced death threats. Yeah, okay. So let's sum up. The US-led invasion is one node in a longer story of Iraq's erosion welfare state and its outside impact on Iraqi women. In 2003, Iraq was already in survival mode, still not recovered from the Iran war and the US-led coalition bombing during the first Gulf War. It has also faced over a decade of UN sanctions, some of the most drastic ever imposed on a country. Sanctions constituted what philosopher Joe Gordon has called the invisible war, and that's what they are having. The sanctions altered the social fabric of the Iraqi society, destroyed the middle class, etc. And this is the very same scenario we're seeing today in Palestine, the West Bank and Gaza. Through economic sanctions, we do that. I think I'll stop here and give you questions. I think I went over time. Any questions?
How are honor killings justified?
And-
Is there something in the Quran?
It's a society tradition.
Ask the
That-
question again.
Oh, yeah.
Second, everybody.
How are the honor killings justified? Is there something that's talked about in the Quran about
No.
honor killings?
It's traditional, it's tribal. What honors one member of the tribe honors all members of the tribe. Therefore, there have to be retribution for that. So if she dishonored the tribe, then she has to pay the price to cleanse the dishonor.
You mentioned a case in Jordan, about honor killing. I heard a few cases way back, but really, there's a lots of strict laws now against the honor.
Well, do you have statistics? Because recently, not too long ago, there were some. I mean, we look at the statistics. And it's still there. It may be covered, but it's still there.
There is any more questions? Well, let's thank Dr. Any question? Dr. Hayani for another excellent
Thank you.
presentation.